We are amped up, Tobacco Road. Welcome to the Blue versus Blue podcast, and it is rivalry week. The three of us are here, donning our own shades of blue, ready for the big showdown on Wednesday. Some of us perhaps more ready than others. We'll get into that. But it is indeed time for Duke UNC Part 1, 2013. I am your host, Zeke Smith, representing the Carolina contingent.
Boo!
And of course, joining me are over there in Durham, North Carolina, the Duke contingent, Mr. Bart Matthews.
Yeah. You know what? I was thinking about it. It's like there's always a portion of dread that comes along with this, regardless of the side that you're on and regardless of how well your teams happen to be doing. In fact, there's a little more involved if your team happens to be doing well and the other one doesn't, right? Because the potential to lose that
is much worse.
Yeah.
I would agree.
You know, I mean, I feel where you're coming from on this one, Zeke, but you know, we'll feel much more vomitously if Duke manages to spit the bit.
Right. Spare me your heavy as the head that wears the crown bit. I'm not buying it. I'm sorry. All I have to say, God help us all if these two teams ever meet in the NCAA tournament, and we're feeling what we feel now. But,
we'll set records for podcast listening.
Well, that part of it will be nice. And, of course, next to Bart there, my brother Alex Smith, appropriately wearing the Asian-symboled Duke hat. Was that an intentional choice this week? Or
Nice try there.
Below the belt. Right.
We keep it classy here.
Yeah.
In Durham.
I was gonna wear my grandma Blue Devil hat, but
I didn't have one.
Since it didn't exist.
Didn't happen, people.
Yeah, we're putting the gauntlet down. No grandma talk on this podcast. That's for sure. This is episode 34 in a collector series, the Blue versus Blue podcast. Now that we've had our opening remarks and taunts, it is time to go to the Duke and UNC State of the Union as we approach round one of our matchup. So first, let's talk about UNC State of the Union. Since we met 2 weeks ago.
Go.
Those of us who are about to perhaps die salute you. So Bart, I think you have 3 questions to launch at me since we last met. What exactly we've experienced?
To kind of sum up the State of the Union, first of all, maybe the highest highs. There's been several wins there from UNC. So what's been the top of the mountain?
5 points.
It's a relatively small mountain. We beat Boston College on the road, Virginia Tech in overtime at home, and then how am I forgetting the last game? And then Wake Forest at home. Before going down to Miami. I would say that the best of those 3 is probably winning against BC on the road, because at least it was a road win.
Not exactly a murderer's row there, is it?
Well, you guys tell me. We beat Boston College by more than Duke did, which by the transitive property must mean that we're going to go on the road and win in Cameron.
Indeed. There's still some glass housery going on.
Yeah.
So... But at least it was nice to see Hairston come in and really spark the team off the bench. They were losing 10-5 when he came into the game, and suddenly, before you knew it, it was turned around 21-12. So that was definitely a high point. And I think we saw that they were playing well off the back of the second half against NC State, where it seemed like they were actually legitimately doing some good things on the court.
Right. So then the next question then, which has a more obvious answer, but many of the lowest of the lows then to ask about.
Try and single one out
in the backstreet mugging that was the Miami game.
Right. So if we had to go with a single moment from the Miami game, it might be the Shane Larkin to Kenny Kaji off the backboard dunk in the second half that. UNC's backs were already broken. There was no need to do that. Really. It was just kind of shoving it in at that point.
And there was a lot of Twitter talk, of course, along those lines as well from both sides of the fence because, of course, if everyone will recall, the Miami team slapped the floor in mockery of Duke's floor slapping when they were up already, I think, 30 or something.
Yeah.
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 It's
At
a
that
team
point
that's
was
playing
really
with a
just
lot of
about
confidence.
giving a cutaway for Sports Center of LeBron James and Dwayne Wade going, oh. So
Yeah, exactly. And with that, they succeeded. Although,
yes.
honestly, I think even more embarrassing than that second half dunk had to be the 22-9 run that Miami got to start off the game, and just hitting 3-pointers from all over the place. Kaji from beyond NBA range, Larkin from practically his own bench. So, yeah, there wasn't much to be done at that point, but UNC wasn't even attempting to do much either. So.
I was surprised that you sidestepped the multiple facials delivered by Kenny Kaji on Michael McAdoo, attempting driving dunks that were like stalled in midair. That would have been my choice, but there's a lot to choose from there.
Well, we all have different preferences. I know that you personally like to go after James McAdoo.
I do.
You would have that would have made it in. I think both of those dunks happened in the second half, if that's right.
Yeah.
I had already blacked out at that point, so
I see.
it's
Well then,
too difficult to remember.
What would be the to bring this to a close for the State of the Union for UNC, the stat that tells the story, something that kind of gives us a summary about the 2 weeks that have passed since our last podcast.
Yeah, well, Miami definitely continued a proud tradition of UNC getting torched from three, especially in their losses and in their big losses. Butler and Indiana both destroyed them from outside in those high-profile games early in the year. And just as a stat that sort of sums it all up, UNC had given up 13 threes combined in the 3 games prior to the Miami game, giving up 15 made threes against Miami alone.
Wait, does that mean I'm going to intercede in a
come on.
kind of way? I mean, giving up 13 threes in 3 games, that's pretty good. Did they play really good defensive ball in those 3 games?
I think they did, and one of the biggest differences, and one of the things that particularly worries me about going up against Duke, is that the 3 teams that they played really only had one relatively dangerous perimeter guy who Dexter Strickland was able to play pretty well. So in the case of Eric Green, he had one of the worst games of his season against UNC because they consistently sent 2 guys at him and made it a priority to stop him on the perimeter.
Right.
And
they still almost lost that game.
And they still almost lost that game because somehow they were not able to capitalize against BC's horrible, horrible defense. So, you win some, you lose some.
Indeed.
So against BC, Carolina held them to 7 of 20 shooting. VT was 4 of 13, and Wake was 2 of 18.
Good.
So you actually saw 25% overall in those 3 games, and not that many attempts from any of those teams either. So it looked like they were forcing those teams to drive in and take more shots in the lane. But Miami, 15 of 26, 57% from the outside. That is not good.
Yeah, no, it's not, but I mean that's the cross, which we all will gladly bear of being a Duke or a UNC fan of, where you just get those nights where they come out blitzing you and you're like, really, you can't just miss a few, you can't come back in the second half and have some slight regression to the mean. No, we're going to shoot 60% from distance.
Marked on everybody's schedule.
Yeah, well, and fair credit to Miami. I mean, they have continued their upward rise just by playing seemingly better and better. Yeah. And they're coming out fired up for these games, when it would be easy for them to take their foot off the pedal a little bit, considering how easily they beat UNC, just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So
this just in, they're good.
Yeah. The State of the Union with UNC is good, but not that good, unfortunately. I think we are a decidedly outside the top 25 team probably for the rest of the year, unless something crazy starts happening that I am not anticipating yet. So let's move to the State of the Union for Duke as we shoot those same questions back at you. Highest highs from the past 2 weeks. What do we have to choose from?
Yeah, well, we're 4-0, so that's good. We still don't have Ryan Kelly, which is not good, but we're 4-0, which is good.
Yes. So you survived some close scrapes. So hard to pick out a lowest low, particularly when you've gone 4-0. But what do you think was the lowest low in the last couple of years?
I'll say a couple more highlights. Just a little more specifically, the FSU game was a romp through the Elysian fields of really, really good basketball. And FSU, it was like the Duke-Miami game, actually, where FSU was Duke and Duke was Miami, if everyone followed that.
Yeah.
Like, FSU could not do anything right at all. And since then, by the way, they have completely fallen off the face of the earth. They've gotten stomped by everyone they've played.
Including Wake Forest.
Yeah. So
in an ugly, ugly way.
But still, Duke shot 60% from the floor. Everything went right. Everything went wrong for FSU. You got to love those games when they come along. They're really, really fun.
And especially at a place where Duke has not played well in the last several years.
Yeah, especially good given that. The state game was obviously a big highlight. It's sort of similar. At least the first half started out like we could do nothing wrong. State could do nothing right. Things evened themselves out a little bit over the course of the second half, which you kind of expected. Both teams were down an important player. Coach K will tell you that it wasn't a revenge game, which is probably true for all of them, but for all of us, it was definitely a revenge game. So that felt good. Seth,
especially for Alex Murphy, who made his one highlight of the year. I think.
Yes, indeed. Hold on to that one, little Alex Murphy.
You'll have something to hold on to. You'll have something to show for show and tell.
Hold on to that one, little buddy.
For your senior.
That's not. And Alex has gotten some really productive minutes. We kid because we love.
Exactly. Hey, Alex Murphy. At least you're not Jordan Vandenberg. Who I just want to feel sorry for every time he steps on the court.
Bless his heart.
Bless his little Australian heart. Seth has scored 21.5 points per game over this 4-game stretch. Our seniors have really done a fantastic job. Mason has gone for 22 and 8 on average over this 4-game stretch, and most importantly, is hitting 27 of 36 from the free throw line over those 4 games. That's 75%.
Yeah.
So he has refigured that out again. Which is
somehow
awesome. I mean, that's the importance of that. I don't think can really be overstated.
Yeah. Well, including a 12 of 16 performance in one game
against State.
Yeah, that's big.
And coming down to the end of games, as we saw in the BC game, right? Like that's, and we've said it before. I mean, there's probably going to come a game in the tournament where it's really, really close, and Mason gets hacked. And us winning will depend on whether he is 75% free throw shooting Mason or 50% free throw shooting Mason. And another interesting point, and then we'll move on to the lowlights, is that Duke has not been out-rebounded in a single one of these 4 victories.
That is shocking.
And in fact, has out-rebounded their opponents in 2 of them.
Did you play anybody particularly tall? I mean, I guess FSU is pretty big.
FSU is really big, and it didn't help them one bit, which has sort of been the big mystery with them in general this year. That hasn't seemed to have mattered.
And it's significant to not get crushed by State on the boards, because we did before. We did get killed on the boards in the loss in Raleigh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So lowest lows. Hit me with some lows. Give me some better news. It's been all good so far.
Well, this is possibly some better news, which I think will ultimately, although it will be not really a segue, but will come up again when we talk Duke Carolina, is that Duke still has this tendency to go through periods where it can't hit anything.
Long droughts.
And not like offensively poor. Yes. Yes, not offensively poor in the sense that like we aren't playing well offensively overall. Like we are still playing well offensively. The ball is moving. Guys are getting open. Guys are driving. They're good shots. They're open shots. They just aren't going in. That's the problem. There was a big 4.5-minute stretch at the end of the Boston College game. There were huge chunks of time in the Wake game. Notoriously, it's starting games that Duke has a hell of a time
man,
with this. Like,
really awful.
Just open shot after open shot, not going in. That led to, as we talked about on the last podcast, part of the Miami debacle is that, like, we get very discouraged very fast when we see shots that we know we should make that don't go in, and then everybody tightens up and it goes down the drain.
Scoring 4 points at the beginning of the first 12 minutes of the Boston College game. Again, it's only fortunate that we were playing Boston College, who was nearly matching us offensive ineptitude for offensive ineptitude.
Mm-hmm.
So it was able to keep us in the game. I mean, it was.
And so that would be my other low light is actually the Boston College game in general. As a whole, was not a work of art. And as I said in my write-up, and I do believe this is true, I had actually poo-pooed the notion that the blizzard and flying in on game day and all this kind of thing was going to be that big of a, and trap game talk and yada yada yada. But however, that's exactly what it was. Like we looked like a team that had just gotten off a plane and hadn't taken a shoot around and we were not in the gym.
Just looked sluggish. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, it was awful.
Which I think it's an easy thing to be dismissive. I don't want to talk about this a whole lot, but whenever I think about for myself, like, traveling and going to the airport and going through security and all of that stuff, like how sapping that is to have to get up that morning, fly there that morning because of the blizzard, and then try and play a game at a kind of a strange time. Starts to become more and more understandable, even though we're talking about 18 and 19-year-old kids.
There's a reason you do things the way you do them on game day. You get there the night before, you get a good night's rest, you get up, you have a shoot around, you have your little film session before the game or strategy session, and then you go and that's the way you do it.
Right.
Right.
So
anyway, it sucked. That's a low light.
They got the rhythm disrupted a little bit, and it almost sounds like Duke is morphing into a little bit of a Carolina, a rich man's Carolina, if you will, in ACC season, where they struggle at the beginning of games, and they also have a tendency, the same way UNC does, I think, to have everybody get hot at the same time and everybody get cold at the same time, which is pretty infuriating, at least as a UNC fan, as I'm sure it is as a Duke fan.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, and so then I'll touch on the stat.
The stat that tells the story. What do we have, Bart?
Well, I mean, this has kind of been mentioned before, but in the last 4 games, Duke has assisted on 63 of 108 field goals.
Wow.
Well, so that's over 60%. I don't have the relative numbers here of averages of other teams during that time, but I can tell you that is very, very
It's
good.
Probably not that high.
It's not that high.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good sign that Duke is getting lots of guys involved and that there's not any particular one-on-one basketball. Mm-hmm. That probably really means a lot of really good things for Quinn Cook as well, as he is a facilitator of many other pieces and parts of that offense.
Yeah, that's very true. And so that's indicative of what I was saying before, is that the offense still moves really well. It's just these periods where we can't put the ball in the basket that get us. And interestingly enough, there's sort of there are these similar periods. It all sort of goes hand in hand. I will say, this is kind of giving the lie to what I just said, but we also have these periods. We're the best turnover team in the ACC. So we only average 10.9 turnovers a game. That's best in the league. And so we have this great assisting on field goals ratio as well. That's a really good combination. But we have these periods also where we become like strangely turnover prone. And they often are, like in the BC game, live ball turnovers. Mm. They're not fumbling the ball out of bounds. Right. They're making like really bad passing decisions. So over that same period of time, the games where we performed really well, we have 10 or fewer turnovers, and in the games where we haven't, we have 13 and 15 turnovers. So there's a real correlation there, and I think it's these, like as you said, Zeke, it's periods where everyone sort of goes down at the same time.
We all go down together.
Yeah, it's a collective 4 to 6 minute. Or in the case of the Miami game, 40-minute
wetting of the bed.
Wetting of the bed.
Right.
Which is not good.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe UNC can sneak up on Duke and catch them unawares on Wednesday. That's that's something we're holding
Put
out.
their hand in the water while they are asleep.
Or maybe there'll be a blizzard and Duke can't get to their
to
own
Cameron Indoor before
stadium.
UNC can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fingers crossed. We're still holding out hope for that. Before we get to Wednesday night and the full extrapolatory preview of that matchup, let's give a quick State of the Union of the ACC in general. The dross of the bottom of the league is probably not really worth spending a lot of time on. Good for you, Michael Sneer.
Nope.
Keep hitting game-winning three-pointers against other garbage teams. But let's talk a little bit about some of the teams that are actually making a move in the ACC.
That still might make the tournament.
Where would Florida State be without Michael Snare, for God's sake? Good Lord. Anyway.
So the big stories in the ACC in the past couple of weeks are the rapid upward rise of Miami, and deservedly so. I think all three of us would agree with.
Yeah.
And so, real quick,
lots of talk about them being the #1 team.
Yeah.
In the country.
So do you guys think maybe not the #1 team? They're probably bound to lose one at some point between now and the ACC tournament. But do you guys think that they are a worthy team of a possible #1 seed in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, well, they are right now. I mean, there's a lot that's going to happen between now and then, but the bruises on their apple were very early in the season, and all of them had one of their significant contributors missing. Now, it's a little bit uglier to say that you lost to Florida Gulf Coast as opposed to Indiana saying, well, we lost to Michigan, or not to Michigan, but to Butler, or other teams that are going to be tournament teams. But in terms of how they are playing now, and that, like you said, the steady and precipitous rise in their showing, yeah, and they have everything that you want. They have really good balance. They have a lot of 27-year-old guys on their squad who've been there for 17 years.
Seventh-year seniors.
Yeah, it's that they have really good balance.
Can you envision a scenario where both Duke and Miami are #1 seeds, or do you think that one of those will probably knock the other one down to a #2 before it's all said and done?
Yeah, that would take a lot more like bludgeoning in the Big Ten for both Duke and Miami to get a #1 seed. It's not inconceivable.
Miami doesn't have any. The only really tough game left on their schedule is Duke. There's really not a lot there. Maybe Virginia, but that's at home.
That's at home. Yeah, they.
So they're looking like they could quite possibly go undefeated. And
the ACC tournament will be particularly interesting for that reason. I mean, I feel like the selection committee does put a lot of weight into tournament performance, because what better way to gauge a team's performance in a neutral environment, round robin or not round robin, but single elimination tournament, than by seeing how they perform in a neutral environment, single elimination tournament.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe whoever wins the ACC tournament possibly nabs the #1 seed between those two teams, and the other one gets knocked down to a 2.
And we also got Virginia, who is sort of climbing the ranks, like winning games. And I brought this up on Twitter. I can ask this to you guys. We'll try not to get too bogged down in it, but. Since Coach K will never ever win the ACC Coach of the Year again, I'm convinced, because just no one wants to give it to him.
Stop recruiting good players.
Right.
Stop having expectations.
Right. Right now, I think it's a dead heat between. I think Larinaga obviously is the front runner for Coach of the Year, but Tony Bennett is going to push him real hard at the rate Virginia is going. They had tons of injuries this year. No one expected them to be really anything, and they're 7-3 and in third place. Yeah,
they still have a lot of tough games. They have to play Miami and UNC and Duke again, and that game against the Heels is at Carolina. So. They could come back to earth a little bit,
or really prove themselves.
So they will merit consideration.
Yeah. But the jury's still.
But it's one of those things where, like, to the victor go the spoils, and there's no way that I can envision at this moment a scenario where Larinaga doesn't win Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, considering expectations, Virginia was maybe 6th or 7th in the ACC and has risen to 3rd, whereas Miami was maybe 4th or 5th in the ACC and has risen to be the clear first-place team right now.
Yeah.
So I think that Larinaga probably gets the bump. But, as I've heard you say many times, Bart, our respect for Tony Bennett knows no bounds at this point.
Yeah.
He is doing really impressive things with that team. And it's just a classic case of a team getting much better as the season goes along.
Yeah.
And
as
I
opposed to North Carolina State.
Yeah, which is the third team that we need to address in our as the ACC turns.
Feeding the fuel of the fire of every NC State fan for the last 10 years. Like collectively, saying, oh, God, here we go again.
If State had lost to Clemson the other day, which they needed a last-second three-point shot to do, they would have been tied with Clemson in the ACC standings at 5 and 6.
Yeah,
and I swear to you, the thought occurred to me. I was like, if State ends up playing on Thursday in the ACC, is Gottfried's job in danger? Like, and I know I'm tongue in cheek. I'm half serious, but I'm half kidding, but I'm half serious. Like, picked to be number 1, 6th in the country to begin with, whatever the preseason polls I know, but 5 and 6.
Yeah. I think really all of that is about them having a really good starting 6, and Tyler Lewis has played well when Lorenzo Brown went down. So that's starting to be 7 players that they can play instead of 6. But then they missed Lorenzo Brown, and they really struggled without him. And you kind of think about like, well, what's going to happen next year when maybe Brown goes pro and they lose C.J. Leslie and Howell and Scott Wood. Like, what is going to happen to that team next year? I know they have some talented guys coming in, but while they have a lot of talent this season, there is a lot of nervousness, I would think, in Stady Nation.
They don't have a leader. They don't have a leader on the sideline, and they don't really have a leader on the court. As I tweeted the other day, they're like a huge, athletically sculpted body with no head.
They're like a more talented version of UNC, honestly. Yeah. And parts of their season have mirrored each other. UNC fortunately hasn't had the exact free fall that NC State has, but they haven't had the highs that NC State has had either.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is pretty ugly. And like you said, it would be interesting to see, if they did something with Gottfried. We'll have to at the end of the season name our least valuable coach and least valuable ACC team to go along with our MVP.
That's true. We should do an inaugural superlatives post ACC season superlative show.
All right, you heard it here first, Blue versus Blue podcast listeners. So keep tuning in for that. All right, so that has been the state of the ACC overall. Now it's time to get down to brass tacks. Let's give some analysis for Duke versus UNC round 1 in Cameron Indoor this Wednesday night.
Ding, 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 fight!
Exactly. So we thought it might be a good idea to break down the game in terms of backcourt, front court, and bench play. And have each guy sort of take the lead. So why don't we go with the starting backcourt to start off? And of course, both teams are kind of heavy on the wing, so these positions are a little bit flexible. Bart, why don't we go to you for starting backcourt and hit us with a little bit of knowledge? What is a stat that might surprise us about the two teams starting backcourts to set up the discussion about where the advantages are in this game?
Well, I don't know if this stat will be surprising to anyone. It probably won't if you've been paying attention. But a whole lot of production comes from behind the 3-point line for both of these teams. Like, I don't know, probably
disproportionately amounts
70% of the backcourt points, or maybe more than that. This is just full of guys who like to take 3-pointers. And they both teams shoot really well. Both backcourts shoot over 40% from 3-point range. They take a lot of them. They're really, if you look at it from a numbers point of view, they really match up very well.
Right.
They're very, very similar. In terms
now, when
of,
you're saying UNC as a backcourt is shooting over 40%, are you talking about the starting guys or throwing Hairston?
They're shooting
and
out.
Bullock in there?
They're shooting at 40%. The backcourt.
Okay.
Now, all of McDonald, Strickland, Page, Hairston.
Okay. So you kind of have to include the bench to get them to that number. I'm getting into my own territory in a little bit.
Right.
We'll talk
Okay.
about
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Right. Sorry. To be clear. Right. Yes. The bench is certainly being included. If it's Page and Strickland, then that's Hairston, McDonald bring it up quite a bit. Yeah. So that's an important point. If we're looking strictly at the starters, and I think that this is going to be obviously a big key to the game. We've already mentioned that UNC has trouble defending the three, okay, and we've also mentioned that Duke has issues hitting open shots. The open shots are going to be there, okay. I believe that will be the case.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of Duke's ability to, if they hit the ones they ought to hit, that will bode really well for them. And from Duke's perspective, Duke is either first or second in the ACC in 3-point percentage defense. And UNC's not actually, but this is always the case. The eye test tells you that they're not good at defending the three.
Correct.
But they're in the top half of the conference in 3-point field goal percentage defense. So go figure.
Well, it's a feast or famine situation. As we were talking about with the 3 games leading up to Miami, or then Miami, there really aren't that many good 3-point shooting teams in the ACC, and the ones who have a couple of guys who can bomb it in are the ones who have really hurt UNC. Miami in both games, UVA got for being a not very high-scoring team, got a disproportionate number of their points from the 3-point line.
When essentially there isn't one guy that they can lock down and focus in on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, you're right, which isn't Duke. I mean, we've got which makes the absence of Ryan Kelly it's always keenly felt, but that would be an extra nice thing to have.
Yeah, it would be an extra bonus. So let me throw this at you. I know this is coming kind of off the top of your head, so you may not have this especially planned out. But if you were coaching UNC, just let me give you a second to absorb that. If you were coaching UNC, how would you tell them to defend Duke's backcourt? Is there any kind of strategy, like, notably about 3 years ago, Roy Williams was switching on every screen, and that kind of threw off Duke's pick-and-roll game a little bit. Would you tell them to do something like that, or is there one guy that you would key in on more than the others? Or
Well, for me, I mean, there'll be an article published shortly on Blue versus Blue, where we kind of look at, from my perspective, what UNC should do or how they could win. To me, it's Strickland's got to play Seth Curry because he's the guy you can't let kill you. Suleiman has definitely had, and Quinn Cook have had games where they have not shot well.
Yeah, actually, I'll pause because I had these numbers earlier and I forgot them. In the Wake and BC games, Suleiman took 9 field goals only and hit 3 of them. Those are the games that were really close where Duke didn't play especially well. In the other 2 games, he was 11 for 19 from the floor and averaged about 17 points a game.
So I mean that would be my strategy, is like Strickland cannot help off of Seth Curry because he is the guy that will consistently make those open shots, and you gotta just hope that Suleiman and or Cook are having a cold night.
Right.
That would be my focus, would be double teaming Mason, which we'll get to in a minute, and not helping off of Seth Curry at all.
Right, and make Suleiman and Quinn Cook have good games.
Yeah. I will say that this is the area that I'm most worried about for UNC. I mean, Page, especially in some of Carolina's biggest games, has looked vastly overmatched on both ends of the floor. And I'm proud of the kid for playing better in the past, half dozen games or so. He's certainly growing into, a decent point guard, but I think he's growing into a decent backup point guard which we just don't need right now. We need a guy who can take control and really contribute on one of those two ends of the floor. And right now he's only quasi-contributing on the offensive end, and he's a major liability on defense.
Yeah. First trip to Cameron, big game. I would say that his ability to to grab the moment or not is huge. And then I would just finally add, before we move to front court considerations, that Suleiman will be defending PJ Hairston when he comes in. And to me, in listening to if you can stop him from getting hot, when he gets hot, he just throws it up. He reminds me of JJ Redick, honestly. Like, he's completely unafraid to shoot from anywhere and can honestly hit from anywhere. It's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, this year, which is interesting too, given how badly he struggled last season, coming in with such a reputation as a dead eye shooter, that he's finally found the confidence, I guess, necessary to contribute in that way.
When he gets that confidence rolling underneath him, he is a dangerous player.
Yeah, and I think that could be really crucial, especially, and we'll get to again the bench play. But if he and McDonald, who has been playing pretty well the past couple of games, can maybe get hot at the same time, then Carolina can possibly stay in this.
Yeah.
But I think one or both of those guys are going to have a double-digit game at least for Carolina to stay within striking distance of Duke. Because I doubt that they're going to get a ton of perimeter scoring from Strickland, because, like you said, Duke doesn't turn the ball over very much. So, that's where most of his points come, is in transition, and Carolina's not going to get that many opportunities to do that. And then Page is probably just going to be worried about facilitating the offense. And I'm not particularly counting on a huge game from him. So
yeah. Well, what's quick poll around the triangle here? Who among the starting backcourt do you think is most important for this game? Like, who's going to have the biggest impact on the game?
Who will? My prediction for who will?
Yeah.
Suleiman. Suleiman has a good game. Doesn't get in foul trouble. That means he's in there for defense against Hairston a lot.
Or defending Bullock.
Yeah, I think my guess is that if he scores more than 13 points, Duke wins.
Okay, what do you think, Alex?
To me, I think the person who will have the biggest impact among the starters is Quinn Cook, because Page is not the kind of player who can get past him. Duke is still vulnerable to dribble penetration. I think the confidence and swagger that he's grown into this year, I expect Quinn Cook to have a dominating game. So
that's interesting. We're each picking a different guy, because I'm going with Seth Curry. He's been a guy who has burned UNC time and time again in the past, and especially at Cameron.
Yeah.
In both of those games has come up huge, and I think sort of the question that I'm asking is he'll have the biggest impact one way or another. If he's having a big game, I think Duke absolutely rolls in this game. If he's not having a big game, then I think Carolina can stay in it, because then that means Duke is depending on still relatively unexperienced guys to get the job done. And while they have proven that they can do it before, I would rather take my chances with that than see Seth Curry bomb in 25 points again.
Right.
On us, and yeah, so
that's
we'll see.
Pretty savvy analysis for a Tar Heel fan.
We'll see.
But you are my brother.
I had a brother who went to Duke, so I know a few things. All right, so let's move to the starting front court. Alex, this is your area of expertise for the podcast. Set the scene for us. Players involved. Stats that might surprise us.
So I thought I'd do a little quick comparison. Don't look at my notes. I see you looking. And
you're looking at mine.
And you tell me quickly.
That's how I got through Duke, by the way.
The two big names in the front court are obviously Mason Plumlee and James Michel McAdoo, my favorite love to hate guy.
McAdoodle-doo.
So I thought I'd do a quick comparison and see, just in ACC play, who do you think has a better field goal percentage?
Mason.
What?
Oh, yeah, Mason.
Yeah, by
Okay.
by a long shot. Mason shooting 58% from the field, and McAdoo only 44%, which is not terrible for a player, but for an inside guy, not so good.
No,
It is
not good.
bad. It is
Not
bad.
good. And I actually heard Montross the other day make that point. He's like, UNC needs to have one guy on the interior shooting over 50%.
Yeah, and especially in the 4 ACC losses that they have, he has shot 36% from the field. From the free throw line, who's got a better free throw percentage on the season?
I'm gonna say that's Mason also.
I'm gonna say Mason.
Yeah, by a narrow margin. Largely from the last 2 games where he's shot free throws again. He's back on the uptick. Struggled in some games, but shooting 62% from the free throw line to McAdoo's again, a little bit embarrassing, 55. So not really great there.
Nope.
Turnovers per game. Who has more turnovers per game?
That's gotta be McAdoo, man.
I'll probably say McAdoo. Sure. I'm sensing a theme, so I'm going with the theme here.
That is actually incorrect, and it's not close. Mason Plumlee has 33 turnovers in 11 ACC games, and McAdoo is averaging a little less, more like 2 per game. He has 24. So
wow.
I thought that was interesting. I mean, I was surprised at the number of turnovers that Mason has. He's had games where he had 7 and 5 in ACC play.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to predict. Is maybe there were a couple who took that number up quite a bit.
And somebody made the point on the commenting. I think it was McLeod maybe on the blog, that he gets the sense that Mason is not really strong with the ball a lot on the interior. Like for a guy who's as big as he is and athletic as he is and looks as strong as he is, he doesn't seem to value the ball all that well, or gets it stripped. Like in the BC game, got it stripped by a guy who was lying on the floor at the time.
Well, and there's also some of those miscellaneous turnovers, a pass that like is zipped into him that is, or a bad post feed where you wonder where the statistician is, who's getting credit for some of those turnovers. But this is another surprising one. Who is leading? Who has more steals?
I would guess McAdoo.
I would guess McAdoo, but
that is also incorrect. It is Mason Plumlee. He has 15 and McAdoo only 13, which was also very surprising to me. What all this was kind of adding up for to me was, they're not that dissimilar in terms of their importance on the team. The main difference is so they have exactly the same. Actually, McAdoo has more shot attempts than Mason in ACC play. Has 129 to Mason's 117. But the field goal percentage then makes a huge difference in terms of their points per game. Mason also has more rebounds. And then whenever you think about the actual matchup between Duke and Carolina, I'm really curious to see like how Carolina is going to defend him, because there's, as I mentioned in the article that I have written, without morphing Joel James's body onto Bryce Johnson, I don't know how they can defend Mason one-on-one. So
His
I'm
name
very
is
curious.
Jackson Simmons, Alex.
Oh,
and
6'7", 220 Jackson Simmons.
The secret weapon who's been being molded all these games for exactly this purpose.
Right.
Exactly.
Aimed directly at Mason Plumlee.
He's going to pull a Chris Carrawell on Tim Duncan and create some stifling defense.
But you may have another point to make about this, but I'm thinking now also of the offensive rebounding potential of the other guys. So when James Michael McAdoo takes some terrible shot, which he is really good at, what happens then?
Well,
that to me is a big key down low, because North Carolina is a really good offensive rebounding team.
Yeah,
and we're not.
In the games where they have played particularly well, they hit the offensive boards hard. But that's, I mean,
That's
like
Bullock.
you talked about, that one of the reasons they are such a good offensive rebounding team is that they have several guys on that team who will take ill-advised shots. And that's more of a problem. I would rather they gathered less offensive rebounds and were more efficient on the offensive end in general. I mean, Carolina nationally is, I think, 6th in the country in possessions per game, which as possessions even slow down in ACC play has not necessarily been true of Carolina. But they're still just not a great shooting team. I mean, and especially we've talked about at the beginning of the year, the two most important pieces for a Roy Williams team are a dominant big man and a point guard. And between the two of those guys, they have been extraordinarily inefficient.
Yeah.
Page is shooting 32% from the field on the year, and McAdoo is shooting 45% from the field on the year with, as you mentioned, like 55 or 58% free throw shooting on the year, 55 in ACC play. So, one or both of those guys has to do much better than that on Wednesday for them to stay in the game.
And the last point I want to sort of make about the starting front court is, okay, so, in terms of their dominance, they won't necessarily be playing each other a whole lot, but McAdoo and Mason, obviously the tilt in that battle goes to Mason thus far, and you would expect him to have a big game, mostly because I think UNC could have trouble defending him. But in some ways, like what's more interesting to me is how much more of a contributor Emile Jefferson has been since Ryan Kelly has been out. He is shooting 57% and actually has quite a number of field goal attempts, more so than a guy who, in the flow of the offense, whenever the ball comes to him, he's never getting like low post feeds to go down and go to work. So most of the stuff he's getting are
Cuts.
Yeah.
Really savvy cuts are putbacks, so getting offensive rebounds, and so that mitigated against the complete non-entity that is Desmond Hubert, who I still don't understand why he's starting. I mean, he's only averaging 12 minutes a game, so it's a starter in name only. So I realize that is that's not necessarily worth harping on, but he's averaging in the ACC play 1.8 rebounds and 1.6 points.
He doesn't even need to be a bench player by name.
Yeah,
really. He hasn't proven hardly anything at this point. I mean, I genuinely do believe Jackson Simmons has been more valuable than Hubert.
But I don't think there's any question about it.
Yeah, he's made more valuable contributions. It's just if Jackson Simmons were starting, then that would mean in this particular matchup that McAdoo would be trying to defend Mason Plumlee, which is
I'm
not
advocating for that, certainly, but
I just don't understand why Bryce Johnson is not starting. He in less minutes is averaging 3 more points per game, and more importantly 2.5 more rebounds per game than Desmond Hubert.
My only feeling, and Zeke, you can corroborate this or not. So we've talked about the Harrison over Strickland thing, and I feel like the Desmond Hubert thing is similar. Roy feels like he defensively contributes something that he cannot get from Johnson, and that the same thing can be said of Strickland versus Harrison. And that he feels like if he doesn't start with some sort of defensive statement in the game, then the other team is just going to score 20 points in the first 5 minutes.
I guess that's true, but the problem, as I'll get into again, when we talk about the bench, is that the starters just haven't played well as a unit, and that includes defensively. So offensively, they've been pretty bad, but defensively, they've been even worse.
So there's nothing to back that up, in other words.
Yeah, especially in Hubert's case, to me, like I don't see that. Whenever I see him start the games, I don't see someone with even the defensive intensity that Strickland tends to play with.
And with this team, it seems like we were talking about that a little bit with similarities to Duke as well. That when they start playing well and when they start rolling, other pieces start to fall in place. Carolina creates good defense for themselves by playing good offense and putting the other team in a position where they have to go the full length of the court instead of missing shots and getting teams going the other way and that kind of thing. So I would, personally, I would prefer to put an offense first team out there and then put defensive guys in, as necessary. The Strickland thing I can understand because there are teams in the ACC who can burn us with that one guy from the outside. And as we talked about, when he plays well against the other team's key perimeter threat, Carolina plays well as a team. So I'm okay for that for the time being. But yeah, Hubert really needs to come out. Roy even addressed this and was asked about this in his radio show this week, and I think we're all just convinced he's trolling the fan base because he was just saying those are clearly the best 5 guys. They won the job in practice.
Yeah. Okay. So
No.
Desmond Hubert is a great practice player, I guess.
So before we move to the bench, we haven't mentioned Reggie Bullock, which is an oversight.
Right.
Because he, again, provides a type of player that Duke potentially has a hard time defending. He's a 6'7" shooting guard, really, for all intents and purposes. So a critical piece is who guards him and how for Duke.
Yeah, so who do you guys think starts off on him?
Well, Suleiman will definitely be guarding him at the beginning of the game. There's no question about that. It will be more interesting to see what happens in the bigger chunk of minutes, which I expect when Hairston and Bullock are in the game together.
Yeah.
And in that case, when UNC is likely going a little bit smaller,
Tyler Thornton.
Then yeah, maybe Tyler Thornton or Suleiman is playing PJ Hairston, and Emil Jefferson and or Josh Hairston is playing Reggie Bullock. And in those cases, then that Bullock matchup I feel like slides more. I can see the plus minus in those sections being more in Bullock's favor.
I see Bullock having a really good game.
He definitely needs to. I'll tell you that. I'll call it right now. If UNC wins, Bullock has scored more than 20 points, and probably gathered 6 or 7 rebounds at least.
Yeah,
agree.
Which means that he has taken advantage of matchup difficulties on that end of the floor. I think the problem that I'm seeing is that he usually likes to start off the game outside and kind of work his way in. And the guy, if Suleiman is the guy guarding him from the opening tip, Suleiman's a really good perimeter defender. If Bullock was the type of guy who could take him inside and muscle him around a little bit, then that would be of a greater advantage. Because right now Bullock has had guys guarding him who are a little bit slower than him generally. Yeah. And so he's been able to, exploit that from the outside. But I don't necessarily see that being the case for
or was more prone to being a slasher because Duke is still vulnerable in terms of committing fouls or then what happens when they get in the paint to dribble penetration. And so unfortunately for UNC, unfortunately for Duke, UNC is not really chock full of people who are likely to be doing a lot of that. So quickly, just to bring the front court to a close, just quick poll around the triangle again. Who do you think has the biggest impact in the game, front court wise, starting front court?
Well,
don't say Desmond Hubert because that's what everyone is going to be saying.
No, I'll stick with Reggie Bullock, actually. Although technically, I don't know if is he a front court player? Are we considering him a front court player?
I don't know. In my mind, I think of him more as a guard, but
as a large backcourt player.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm gonna say it's hard to say like one person without being too obvious. The most important thing about it to me is foul trouble because it's something that Duke's still very vulnerable to. If Mason were to get in foul trouble, they proved they could play without him against Florida State, which is great. But I'm very afraid of him picking up early fouls.
Yeah, for that reason, I was going to say Mason, just because he has the biggest impact one way or another. If for some reason he ends up being a person who picks up a couple early fouls or something like that, then that could massively swing the tide of the game if Carolina can take advantage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's the same answer for me. Mason is the biggest piece. How Carolina defends him matters. I assume that they will try to double team him. So how he can respond to being double teamed, because again, whenever he can handle that effectively, then Duke is very dangerous. I don't really foresee McAdoo having a monster game. He will get his tip out steal from high pressure and get some putbacks. I don't expect him to have a huge overall impact. So I think it's clear that Mason is the key cog. Like Bart said, whether that's foul trouble, how he handles the double team, if UNC can handle him inside, all of those questions are really where that revolves.
Well, and picking up fouls on McAdoo as well, which he's had a couple of ACC games where he's gotten in trouble in the early minutes. So,
all right, Zeke, hit us with the bench.
Okay. This may not especially surprise you either, as some of our sort of surprising stats. But if I was to tell you 81 to 44, what might you think those numbers mean by any chance?
That is the predicted score of the Duke Carolina game.
Yeah, maybe we'll get to that later. We'll see if you're doing that. No, not quite. That is the combined score that UNC has been losing by at the first road stoppage this season. UNC has not led at the first media timeout of a single road game this year. And that's exactly why the bench is so crucial in this game, because they have played like absolute crap on the road. The starting five has, and the bench hasn't been a ton better. So UNC's road struggles are well documented, and while they've won a few games on the road against some not particularly good opponents, Cameron is a place where that team comes out high energy, ready to frothing at the mouth. And so, if Carolina comes out in the same way that they have in other road contests, then it's going to be up to the bench to shoot them back into it. Yeah. And that's exactly why I think the bench is so crucial in this game. Honestly, I'm curious for you guys. Is there anybody other than Hairston? So Hairston is the obvious choice for a guy that you might be a little bit afraid of. Is there anybody else on UNC's bench that you think can have any kind of impact in this game?
Yeah, there's a number of guys, quite honestly.
Bryce
Johnson, I still contend is like UNC's answer in terms of a true post player who could, who scores effectively.
Is also an offense, grab the offensive rebound, get the stick back kind of guy.
And so I think he's tall enough to shoot over even Mason Plumlee, who is not a great defender. And if Emil Jefferson or Josh Hairston is trying to check Bryce Johnson, like, he can easily score over either shoulder. And I think you have to now throw Leslie McDonald back in. He's been kind of a forgotten guy with the injury and the suspension.
Fourth on the team in scoring.
But yeah, he's scoring in bundles, and like you said, they're going to need some scoring punch off the bench. While it's interesting that you would point out UNC's road woes, there's also tons of as we've already alluded to, beginnings of games where Duke comes out really cold, and it's not necessarily it'll be very interesting, like the first couple of shots, how that affects the trajectory. I would venture to guess that will matter a lot. That if Duke can hit the first few, then UNC could be in trouble. And that it might, it's interesting, like, have a more fragile effect on Duke's effectiveness early on.
Well, and I also think the bench is so crucial in this game, because even if Duke gets out to a healthy start but not an overwhelming one, then the bench is one of the few areas this game where I think UNC has an advantage.
True.
They have a lot of guys, even in bodies like Joel James and Jackson Simmons, who aren't enormously valuable in all aspects. That's just another guy that they can throw at Plumlee, and put him on the line if necessary. Possibly just get in there to get rebounds and kick it back out. So, those are guys who are valuable for that, if nothing else. And Duke doesn't have a lot of those guys. If some crucial guys in their starting five get in foul trouble, or are super cold early in the game, I don't necessarily know who they go to provide, scoring punch off the bench.
There's not going to be a lot of scoring punch coming off the bench.
Yeah.
So that is for sure. And in terms of, like, who you expect to make positive contributions, there's lots of guys from UNC's bench that I expect could make positive contributions, and I don't necessarily feel a lot of expectation that Hairston and Tyler Thornton. They're interestingly like exactly what you're hoping for. They're guys who bring effort.
They're
off the bench,
toughness minutes.
Which is what you would expect for someone like, for instance, Jackson Simmons, who can bring like consistent, motivated energy that then results in some sort of effective play. Scoring some points, getting some rebounds, mostly from like actually having effort.
I was gonna say. So I'm feeling like we should move on to the next section and do a little rapid fire.
All right, I'll throw this one last thing out there, which is that Carolina, in order to win this game, I'm also saying has to tighten up the bench just a little bit. Roy has been throwing a number of guys out there, including a quite mind-bottlingly stat of having 20 different lineup combinations against Miami. 20 lineup combinations. So
hard to know your role when that is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the breakdown piece by piece is done. You guys are actually helping me feel a little bit better. It's almost sounding like these teams, are slightly more evenly matched than they are in real life, I think.
We're prone to be fairly circumspect about these things. It pays.
The cautious optimism has been doing well for you guys this year.
Yeah.
So let's talk about just taking an overall look at the game. We broke it down piece by piece, but what scenario could you possibly envision Carolina winning this game?
We've kind of
other than the blizzard that keeps Duke out of camera that we covered.
Mason gets in foul trouble. Duke has an extended period of missing open looks, combined with a really crappy game from Rashid Suleiman.
Okay,
but in some ways it would require kind of all of those things, right? That's where the hope is probably not high in Carolina land for fans who are paying close attention.
I think
you kind of need a little bit of a perfect storm. I think the other real key, and this was the first thing in the article that I wrote, is Carolina killing Duke on the offensive glass.
Good. Yeah, right. That's the other week.
I think that to me in some ways would be the key to keep them in the game, because like you said, Zeke, they're not necessarily a stellar shooting team collectively. There's going to be a lot of offensive boards available, and in some ways, like Emil Jefferson and Josh Hairston have helped out. Ryan Kelly's not a great rebounder, but not that we wouldn't like to have him back. I don't mean to imply that. But I think that to me is the key of UNC staying in the game. They also could, because it's a rivalry game and UNC people are going to be amped up. They could end up shooting 45 or 50% from 3-point range. So they're going to have to be filling it up from outside and be crashing the offensive glass.
I think North Carolina will get their points. Duke's defense is not great without Ryan Kelly. It's a question of what's going to happen with Duke's offense. Are they going to be able to do what they normally do? If they do, then they win. Zeke, what do you think?
And I'm particularly thinking it's a first half issue in the games where Carolina has really let games slip away from them. Butler, Indiana, NC State. Those games have gotten away from them in the first half, particularly, and it was sort of a snowball thing of getting down by about 9, and then suddenly thinking all their points had to come from the perimeter. So when you're launching long shots, you're giving up long rebounds, you're giving up transition points, and just things are spiraling downwards very quickly.
Yeah. Bad shots lead to easy points for the other team.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if Carolina manages to stay in it in the first half, then I'm holding out some hope. Mm-hmm. But I think if it gets away from them quick, then yeah, sure, Carolina might get their points. It might be a case of playing against NC State where they scored 57 in the second half or something like that, but it was just way too little too late by then. So they've got to do a better job on defense in this game.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the other things I was tempted to say when I was writing my article is like, if they can play with the defensive effort that they played against Butler in the last, whatever it was, 15 minutes or so, when they actually got back into the game, that's another way that they could be in the game and win the game. It's just there's not a whole lot of, other than it being a rivalry game, of true expectation that they're going to give that kind of defensive effort. And so,
and time is really running out on Carolina to make any kind of impact on their postseason resume, because it's looking more and more like a home game against NC State won't be quite as impressive as it could have even been, and that's certainly not a sure shot for Carolina either. And the one marquee win that they have against UNLV is a team that has struggled pretty mightily in the past month as well.
As I tweeted the other day, Carolina has only 3 wins against teams with an RPI of less than 100.
Yeah, so it's time to put something together for this one. At least make it a close game, if not a win. Now is definitely the time to reinforce some of the belief that came with a top 15 preseason ranking. Is there any kind of blueprint that you guys have seen? Obviously, Duke has only lost lost twice this year, but is there any kind of blueprint that you've seen for beating the Devils or keeping the game close, or is it kind of a case of Duke's only, or the only chance of helping make Duke lose is Duke playing badly themselves?
Well, to me, like the answer to like the actual blueprint of beating Duke would be largely about dribble penetration. They struggled a little bit against VCU. Like that's the thing that kept VCU in the game. That's certainly the thing that kept Louisville in the game. Having a dominating backcourt that like could get back past Duke, and a big chunk of why Miami routed Duke was Durant Scott and Larkin, like making Duke look like the team from last season. So that to me is the big piece of the blueprint of beating Duke. And that usually then goes hand in hand with us not shooting well. I think, or maybe the one affects the other. When Duke doesn't shoot well, then their defensive intensity really suffers. They don't really rely on grounding themselves with defense, and offense is like kind of comes and goes.
And how the game is officiated, that is going to have a lot. That's not under anyone's purview, but if they let a lot go, if they allow things to be really physical, I think being really physical with Duke's team is another way of
something that gets in their heads a little bit.
Yeah, and also like grab shooters and getting their grill a little
bit.
bit.
Yeah, because we're definitely, I would say our shooters are prone to looking exasperatedly at officials on that, that kind of like touch and go stuff on a challenge jump shot where there's some contact that could be called, but in a playground scenario is not going to be a foul, like that kind of thing.
Well, it sounds a lot like even the points we're making is just going back to reiterating that the backcourt is going to be the part that really makes and breaks this game in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't know if that spells good things for Carolina. I have been saying all season Dexter Strickland is due for a 40-point game, so you never know. It could happen.
Interesting.
Quick question for you guys. So, obviously, Carolina has had several victories of 18 or more this year. I think 4 by my count. Or excuse me, not victories, but losses, actually.
The other thing.
And yes, the opposite of victories, actually. What % chance would you give Duke of beating the old mark set in 2010 of a 32-point win against UNC?
With Ryan Kelly, I would give you some kind of marginally reasonable percentage of that happening.
Okay.
Without Ryan Kelly, I'd say 5%.
Yeah, I would say less than that. I mean, as you have been alluding to, Zeke, this UNC team doesn't necessarily respond very well whenever they get down, and have adversity, which is what you need to have a blowout, is like both Duke and UNC fared against Miami down in Coral Gables, where you get down and then you just keep playing like a cold turd on top of that. And so
not a warm turd.
That's possible. I can't imagine them losing by 30. I could definitely see it, 20 points, like you said, them just not being able to respond well to the adversity of playing in Cameron, and Duke shooting hot from outside, but that would be, I would give almost no chance.
Okay. So we're seeing, so at least we won't have to relive that again.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Next question.
Okay. Well, since this is a rivalry podcast after all, I figured we would probably end the podcast by getting into some grudging respect and irrational hatred, the things that we all really thrive on. So let's do a little bit of a round robin here, and go through these quick fire questions. Who do you most fear from the other team? Alex, let's go to you first. Who do you most fear from Carolina?
Let's keep it moving.
To me, it's definitely PJ Hairston. He's an energy guy. He can get buckets when UNC really needs them. So him responding is the guy that I feel like will be the most important if UNC were to actually win, is definitely PJ Hairston.
Yeah,
all right. What about you, Bart?
Also PJ Hairston. I without question. Like, keeping him bottled up to me is if that happens, Duke wins.
All right. Never thought you would have said that before after last year, huh?
No.
I would say the guy I fear most is Seth Curry, probably just because he's done it before, and even in scenarios where there were more dangerous guys around him, he's shown in both Cameron games against UNC. So I'm not optimistic about keeping him under 20 points in this game. I think, especially with as well as he's been playing of late.
Yeah.
All right, so question number 2. The reason I most hate this year's Duke or Carolina squad is fill in the blank.
Am I answering for Carolina? Because I like Duke. Just want to say that.
There's nothing you hate about Duke. No, what is it you hate about Carolina, guys?
The fact that they just keep winning all of these games that they're supposed to win. I just want them to lose a couple of those, like the Virginia Tech game, so that they don't get into the NCAA tournament. But they just won't lose those games they're supposed to win. So it looks like, unless the wheels really come off, they're going to win 20 games easy. So I'm very disappointed and not liking that at all.
Limping in as a double-digit seed.
Yeah, don't want them in. How about you?
Well, it's already been alluded to. This is probably an easy one for you guys to forecast. The thing that I hate most about this year's Carolina team is James Michael McAdoo. He's someone that I still don't understand the NBA hype around. He plays no defense. He makes bad decisions consistently. The fact that he can hit a 15-foot, jumper is great. But again, in the Miami game, once again, I reverted back to my counting the number of passes that he makes below the free throw line in the entire game, and it was 2, and one of them he was being double teamed. He's like a head down. I'm gonna do whatever. I'm gonna shoot no matter what happens as soon as I get the ball below the key, and he drives me crazy.
Well, the NBA hype around him is a lot less now than it was last year.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
So there's that.
Interesting.
Zeke.
Yeah,
you get 2. Zeke, you get 2.
Oh, I get 2. Well,
we'll give you a bonus.
Let's see.
If you really hate the first one, then we'll let you hate the second one.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess for my bonus, I'll go with the entire assistant coaching staff. Can I bunch them all together?
Sure.
Krzyzewski has a little bit of begrudging respect from me, obviously, but every one of those guys that's paired up with him, I just sort of wrinkle my nose at and go,
you
why?
Hate Jeff Capel? Really?
He's all right, I guess. Okay, so the white portion of Duke's assistant coaching staff, I'm not especially fond of. Yeah, I just think they are Duke's bench celebration guys. So there's nobody on Duke's bench who pulls a Kent Bazemore from Golden State Warriors, who's making himself famous this year in NBA circles with the fist pumping antics after a big made basket. Duke doesn't particularly have one of those guys, but their assistant coaches provide plenty of histrionics. They've picked up right where John Shire left off with the mutilated faces at key points in a Duke game. I was going to say for number one, the reason I most hate this Duke squad is also Seth Curry. I think it's again a begrudging respect combined with hatred.
Yeah.
I don't like the Dwight Howard-esque sort of limp around half the year. I'm still playing on an injury, but I can still make 8 of 9 threes. I'll sit out this game. Oh, and then I'll play this big game and score 30. Everybody feels sorry for me. I'm really toughing it out. I'm so tough.
How can you be missing hyping on the mouthpiece, chewing on the mouthpiece? That's another.
Yeah.
Don't forget his insouciance.
Give me more things to hate. Come on, feed the beast.
Yeah, the mouth guard annoys me, quite honestly. That's really.
Well, you're gonna have even more things to hate after Wednesday, my friend.
Oh, all right. Well, let's get to that. So let's wrap the podcast up with final score predictions, and let us remind each other that if anybody incorrectly picks against your own team, well, let the buyer beware. We'll just say that. Some slightly embarrassing thing will have to happen to them in 2 weeks' time when we resume the Blue versus Blue podcast.
If you pick against your own team and they win, that's the kicker.
Right? Yes, exactly. This is not a spread proposition.
No.
Okay, so final score predictions. Bart, let's go to you first. What do you think?
78-70. Boom.
And who wins?
Oh, sorry. Duke.
Okay. All right. What do you think, Alex?
I will say 72 for UNC and 88 for Duke. I think it will be a big win. I think Duke will score a boatload of points.
Wow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my prediction was not altogether different from you guys. I wrote this down ahead of time just because I didn't want to let myself get too convinced by any points that we would make on the podcast. But I wrote down Duke 85, UNC 70. Duke's been really good at home. Carolina has been pretty terrible on the road, and they just haven't shown me enough to convince me that that's going to change all of a sudden. So, yeah, but please prove me wrong. Please prove me wrong, UNC.
Happy to do something embarrassing the next podcast.
Yes, exactly. I will wear a tutu on my head or whatever if Marcus Page manages to go off for 25 points in this game. It's just difficult for me to envision a scenario where, as you said, 4 or 5 things all go right for Carolina and 3 or 4 things all go wrong for Duke. But
yeah.
We'll see. That's why they play the games, people. That's why they play the games. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. This has been the Blue versus Blue podcast, episode 34. Time to sign off and get ready for Wednesday night. You guys go join the line in Kville. This is your host, Zeke Smith, signing off, saying good night and good luck. And thanks, as always, for joining me, Mr. Bart Matthews.
Just remember, Carolina, you mess with the devil, you get the horn.
And Mr. Alex Smith.
Go to hell, Carolina, go to hell. Go to hell, Carolina, go to hell. Love you, brother.
Ooh. This is Zeke Smith again signing off, saying take care and smooch your grandma tonight. All right. Good night, everybody.